Good morning. Hyvää huomenta. My name is Teresa Barber and I'm the British Ambassador to Finland. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you here this morning, both in the room and joining us from all sorts of other places, to very cold and slightly snowy Helsinki. If yesterday was Cyber Monday, as it was for shopping purposes, certainly in the UK and I think the US, then I am declaring that today is Cyber Security Tuesday, as we have this very important round table here on a topic which I know is at the front of all your minds. It's also at the front of our minds here in the embassy, particularly this week, as we have a cybersecurity delegation attending Slush, which is a huge event for us and for Finland and for everybody attending it here in Helsinki. It's also Cybersecurity Tuesday because I understand that the head of our Foreign Intelligence Service, Richard Moore, will be making a speech in the UK today in which he will talk about the themes which I think we are going to be covering today, which is about the fact that cybersecurity knows no borders. It respects no physical borders. It doesn't respect the borders between the secret world and the not-so-secret world, and it certainly doesn't respect any borders that we might think exist between the public and private parts of our communities. And all of those, I know, are things that will be on your agenda today. So I wish you a very interesting and enjoyable discussion. I hope that everybody can leave today feeling that they have learnt something that they didn't know before and take away something to think about, which they hadn't thought about before. So have a fantastic session. I'm sure it will be productive. And I'm now going to hand over to Michael Powell, who is the interim cyber ambassador from the Department of International Trade in the UK. Michael, thank you.
Thank you very much, Tracy. I like the linkage to Cyber Monday, having just come from the US. That's fantastic. Thank you for that. As mentioned, cybersecurity top of everyone's mind these days, and it's something as a topic that is completely unavoidable. And regardless of which tech convention you're at, regardless of which summit you're attending, or which boardroom meeting you're in, the cybersecurity conversation is one that's being had at all levels of an organisation. And I'm delighted to see that is now the case. Once it was relegated to IT departments, but the fact that we have such a broad representation here on the panel shows that everyone's looking at cybersecurity through their own lens. And what we hope to do here is sort of overlap a few of those lenses, and hopefully we'll have a conversation. Maybe it'll be a debate. I hope we don't get insofar as an argument live on camera. But it's great to have the small audience that we have here, and then obviously the audience that we have watching live as well. So around the world we see very different levels of success when it comes to forming public-private partnerships. I believe that the UK does a good job of this, and actually trying to get the various parts of government, academia and industry talking with each other. So what we're going to debate here is how well that is done, the things that are done well, the things that aren't done quite so well, and I think we can hopefully all be candid in that discussion. So I'm going to ask a few questions, but first I'm actually going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves, and hopefully we can get a picture of that current state of collaboration, and then maybe set a few actions for us to go away and think about over the coming months. So if I can go to the far end of the panel first, and I'll ask each panelist to introduce themselves, that would be fantastic.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Visa. I like the credit card. I'm a senior scientist of applied cryptography in VTT, Technical Research Center of Finland. Background in mathematics, and I'm now researching post-quantum cryptography and also long experience in cybersecurity. Thank you.
Morning everyone, I'm Dan Pilkington. I'm the Regional Cyber Lead for the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office based in Copenhagen. Delighted to be here in Helsinki today.
Good morning, I'm Adrian Ish. I manage the cybersecurity business at BA Systems. We look after our strategy as well as some of our technical services areas.
Good morning, I'm Saj Huck, Director of Innovation at Plexel. At Plexel we specialise in running innovation programmes in cybersecurity and across the emerging technology spectrum. We've delivered Europe's largest cybersecurity accelerator, Lorca, over the last 3 years, and are the innovation partner to the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre.
Good morning, I'm Risto Silasmaa, founder and chairman of F-Secure.
Good morning, I'm Helvi Salminen. I'm a board member and senior advisor in a small startup specialized in cryptographic services, and I have a background in cybersecurity for more than 30 years, including also management of cryptographic systems.
And good morning to you from my side. My name is Stefan Lee. Thank you for the invitation. I'm heading currently the team for technology and security, covering broad range of emerging security threats, challenges, including cyber, but hybrid and disruptive technology security policy angles. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. So first question, Dan, I'm going to throw it your way if that's okay. And I know you're not prepared for this, so I'll give you a second or so. So what I really want to get a sense of initially is the baseline. What do we think is the role of the public sector and the role of the private sector, and where do we currently in the UK, for example, draw that line? And then I'll open it up to discussion so that others can comment.
Thanks, Michael. It's a really good question. It's a slightly philosophical question, but I would say that in government we've been on a bit of a journey towards, I think, the government playing a greater role in national cybersecurity. So I would say that in our strategy in 2011, we were thinking about government as a catalyzer, so having an impact on supply and demand in the cybersecurity industry. And I think that in 2016, we started to think a little bit more about the scale and the size of the cybersecurity challenge, and thinking that perhaps government needs to be a bit more, play a greater role, perhaps be a bit more interventionist. And of course, in our 2016 strategy, building a national cybersecurity centre, and then perhaps now thinking about the role of government as a regulator, so that range of options in terms of how we drive better cybersecurity standards. There are areas, I think, of areas of the challenge where there's a role for government in regulating, establishing requirements on the private sector, but also a really important role for government in partnering with the private sector. And doing that in innovative ways, focusing very much on trust-based relationships, long-term relationships. So it's a real sort of mix of ways of public-private partnership and engagement, sort of tailored to specific areas of challenge rather than one option being 100% the right one.
Fantastic, Saj.
Yeah,
can you jump in there?
I agree with Dan. So I mentioned that we've been partnering with government in a number of our programs over the last couple of years, and we've certainly seen a shift in how government's looking to work with industry. So that includes people like ourselves, but also the ecosystems that we represent of SMEs and industry partners. Quite interestingly, we've started to see a lot more openness from government in terms of information sharing, and also a willingness to really go beyond, as Dan mentioned, catalysing the marketplace and hoping good things will emerge in terms of capability development, to really playing a much more active role, helping to drive through SME spend, for example, into emerging companies, but also helping to use the convening power of government, which is, I think, pretty unique, to bring what is quite a disparate sector at times together.
And then Risto, perhaps in your role as chairman of F-Secure, you can talk a little bit to where you feel the limits are for the corporate world, the things that should be left to government, or the extremes, or the extent to which a corporate can go to protect national security.
The challenge really is that outside the government's traditional role of educating the community, using regulation to set requirements, which has not been done that much for cybersecurity yet. It's quite difficult for the government to do much more to protect the private sector. partially because of technology development. Now that we have moved into cloud services, which are typically somewhere outside the borders of the country, and the customers may be largely outside the borders of the country as well. So both the source of the service as well as the customers are outside our own nation's borders. It's very difficult for the government to start protecting the business and the customers. So operationally, the government can maybe do what police has done for traditional crime, but to a much more limited extent. Then what companies can do for national security, I think the critical infrastructure is largely in the hands of private companies nowadays. So they have to do their part in protecting those services and that infrastructure. The challenge is just that cybersecurity as a capability is very difficult to define. It's difficult to set exact parameters which have to be achieved by companies, and that could be easily measured and trained, and we are all fumbling in a fog, trying to find the right way to do cybersecurity for different sectors and different businesses.
Yeah. And I think that's a model certainly I've seen from my time in the US, which is how each sector will come at cybersecurity from a different angle, whether that's a compliance angle, whether it's if they're in financial services protecting banking infrastructure, and then the cloud services agencies look very differently at the way that they protect cloud as well. So I think it is very much a complicated conversation because there is no, as you said, no one-size-fits-all model. It very much depends on the organization and the risk they're carrying. But one thing that I've noticed is always a common thread in these conversations is information sharing. And one of the things that organizations always say is, we do information sharing as well as we can, but we really wish we could potentially do more of that. Does anyone want to pick up on the topic of information sharing and give their views on what is done well there?
Can I add a quick point there?
Sure.
Well, I have been in cybersecurity for over 30 years and started in antivirus, and even back then there was a sort of an ethos in the community that we always traded information amongst competitors, and we decided that no one's customers should suffer because a company is hiding some technical information from its competitor. And that ethos has been a very valuable foundation for the cybersecurity industry. Now it's eroding a little bit and then disappearing a little bit, but I hope that we could bring more of that back. And then amongst companies, it used to be so that everyone who was penetrated or infected was trying to hide it. And we have always tried to encourage companies to talk about their cybersecurity incidents so that others could learn and everyone would know what is going on. And there we have made progress, but it's still happening. Companies are still trying to hide what's happening inside their environment if it's something bad. So I think in terms of openness, we still have ways to go.
I think we'll come back to the topic a bit later of why organisations potentially hide the fact that they've had breaches. Stefan, perhaps I can come to you from your role looking at policy in this regard. How well do you feel that the public and the private sectors share with each other, and how well do you feel that the private sector as a whole just shares internally within itself?
Well, it's a kind of perplexing question itself. I mean, I think it varies. The practice varies from country to country, and that is probably one of the biggest challenges why when we are facing this cybersecurity, which is multidimensional and it's global, right? So I think in our case, nationally, I mean, everything boils down to the confidence, the trust between the different business community and our cybersecurity community, and also the more broader national security agencies. I mean, it requires quite a bit of a trust and understanding, shared understanding on the situation, on the threat, and it is not something that you can just impose based on some legal framework. Yes, it's a starting point, but it requires a constant contact, a dialogue, and which should be grounded on the really strong trust among the stakeholders. I believe in our case we have a very traditional standpoint when it comes to national security, and as previous speakers mentioned, I mean, cybersecurity is no longer the subject of IT departments, right? It's no. I think that I would like to remark that, you know, today is a cybersecurity day. I think to me cybersecurity should be every day, should be cybersecurity, and I think that, you know, in our case we have a long-standing tradition of whole of society approach to different security challenges that are causing challenges, and this is one of the prime example in our case, that we have a very good interactions between our CERT and our companies, and sharing the information is one crucial step on that. In the international context, I believe that there is a lot of work to do. There's the UN framework on responsible behavior of states in cyberspace, which includes norms specifically on information sharing because of the sort of calamity that it could cause once it gets out of the box, so to speak. So, but there we are still struggling to find a common ground. But on the national and the EU level, I think that there are some promising signs. But of course, it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. We need a global approach. We need a global communication. But you know, I think there are a lot of promising work and processes being done by governments, but also by the other stakeholders.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. And you know, in terms of information sharing, what holds organizations back? Obviously, Risto has said about you know, organizations potentially hiding the fact that they were breached because of, you know, a fear of some kind of reprisal or something. But what in general, when you're talking to organizations or being part of organizations, holds your organization back from actually, you know, being open and sharing that data? Is it the technical complexity? Is it the fear of, you know, intellectual property getting into other people's hands? What is sort of that primary that primary desire or that primary reason to hold on to something rather than just share it into a public domain? Perhaps I can come across to Adrian, working for BAE there, just to start us off on that.
Sure. Yeah. So I think part of the challenge in information sharing is it's like a market challenge in economics. You've got two parties. One party has a need, the other party has something to supply, and there's an information gap there. What information do I need from who? And on the other side, what information can I share that would be of use? So breaking that down is part of the difficulty. And once you've done that, you still have the difficulty of actually, you know, enabling it through technology, so making the information sharing as automated as possible, and also seeing that it is actually providing actionable value. Because you as somebody who's sharing, you don't want to be just throwing stuff out into the dark. You want to be seeing that somebody's gotten some use out of that. So how do you get some feedback, essentially, to know what was useful and what was actionable? And there's just a whole myriad of problems in there. And I think they come down to sort of economic problems of actually breaking down that sort of information gap between the people who know stuff and the people who need to have that information.
And we have the two technical experts on the panel as well, so I'm just wondering whether we can talk a little bit about, you know, the technical complexity maybe of that information sharing and how we get the detail of that information correct. Are we sharing enough that people can do something with it, but, you know, not necessarily oversharing, so that the inner workings of our own environments, our own technology stack is made public?
Okay, I think you kind of hit the point, because it's sometimes very difficult to say what can I share without putting in danger my IPRs. And then, of course, sharing all the vulnerability information, that also there's a fear that somebody can use that information against my business. So I kind of want to hold it to myself, so that my competitor in the next tender, government tender, for instance, will not use that against us. Okay, that company is kind of not doing things well. They are not secure. So these type of fears at least can exist.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yes. Well, one solution could be to use the modern technology to share this information. For example, homomorphic encryption enables people to read and analyze data which is encrypted. For example, in Brasilia, there was this case when cybersecurity experts tried to find out people who were money laundering, but the banks couldn't give the access to the banking data, but they make this homomorphic algorithm that could read all the money transactions in different banks and find the original source, and then found the people who were laundering the money, and everything was done with encrypted data. So that's one solution for this.
Okay. Michael, if I may add, I wonder if the change in the kind of threat landscape recently, so I think the increase in ransomware attacks has actually made it more difficult to share information, because when you think about an organisation trying to respond to an incident where there's a monetary value placed on their response, and then it's time limited, as in you need to respond by X, that creates a completely different organisational mindset, I think, at times, about what the organisation should do in that instance. Really, they're trying to think about time, as in buying time, and then, rightly or wrongly, they're thinking about the trade-off between paying potentially a ransom or not. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if then layering in how and to whom we should share this information with into that decision loop actually makes it more complicated, because that creates a risk for the organisation at times, potentially, that they can't buy themselves that time or necessarily respond to the incident effectively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, ransomware is... See, I don't think you can have any cybersecurity conversation here in 2021 without the topic of ransomware coming up, right? But to me, that's an example of where we need to get these relationships right. There are levers that governments have, there are levers that academic institutions have, there are levers that organizations have, and actually in some of the more public examples of that you've seen in the US, it's only when each of the people are playing their part and pulling their levers that you really manage to make substantial progress, whether that's recovering funds because someone's had to pay a ransom, or it's whether a government is saying we don't pay ransoms, okay, but then what support is being provided to ensure that organizations can take that position as and when they are compromised. So yeah, absolutely, Rita.
If I may still add to the topic of disclosing, the one challenge there is always the uncertainty related to legal liabilities. Mm-hmm. And if a CISO thinks about publishing information about an incident, he will typically, or she will, contact the company's lawyers. And we know how the legal department will think about it. Their job is to minimize risk. Mm-hmm. So if they want to be safe, they will say that don't say anything. And then they need strong reasons to say that, yeah, please go ahead and publish what happened. And this is one of the roles for the government, mm-hmm. to protect against illegal liabilities and set some requirements for disclosure. Because otherwise, companies, in order to protect their shareholders, will take the cautious route forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And actually, that's one of the talking points that I've potentially put down here to go down that rabbit hole. We'll see exactly which way we go. But is it primarily, you think, privilege and legal liability that makes those relationships between commercial organizations and government difficult? Because also I've got here a couple of things on, is it, as you were alluding to, national and international restrictions? Is it competition return? Is it competition concerns? Is it, is it security of data as it flows through borders? Or do you really see it just as a complex mixture of all of those problems? Is there one that sort of stands out most substantially? And Dan just flagged me, so I'll pass over there first.
Thanks, Michael. I really liked Adrian's analogy of a market and thinking about the incentives and the disincentives for sharing at any particular point in time. There's really good points on ransomware scenarios as well. And I would say that in the UK experience, because our primary information sharing platform, CISP, has been sort of 10 years in the making. It's taken us 10 years to develop this level of kind of trust-based community in which all of the participants are sharing actively in that environment. And over time, the participants will have developed a sense of there being benefit to them in the long term of being an active participant, of sharing, of trusting the community that they're part of, and seeing greater benefit in putting information out there, in reaching out to their partners than they see risk. And that took some time for us to get to that position. And I think it also took some time for us to perhaps get over the hurdle of these information sharing partnerships being viewed as a mechanism purely for government to share with industry. Very early on in the days of our piloting of those arrangements, we face this basic idea that this is about you, government, sharing with us as industry, and that's what this is for. And we worked quite hard to persuade the first participants in that environment that actually it was a construct that would only be successful if everybody was prepared to share and support each other.
Yeah, and I mean that's obviously at a national level, the way that the CISP solution, if that's the right choice of words, works in the UK. But I'm also interested in the take on, so one of the things I come across a lot in the US is the ISACs. So it's the information sharing groups that seem to work quite well in sectors. Is that a model that's replicated well here in Finland as well? Do you see that information sharing happens within those sectors, within those verticals? And are there any that stand out to you as exceptional in the way that they do that, or any that really could do with additional assistance from the public sector? Might be best to go here first. I'm looking at you.
I don't know. I don't know the details because I'm more on the diplomacy and policy side. But what I can say is the sort of the. I just want to pick up on what Risto said about certainty or predictability, which is absolutely key in creating the legal framework, and it in turn will promote the sort of the dialogue and interaction that is required to establish that trust, right? Mm-hmm. So we have that in place in Finland, both formally and informally, but in the more broader context in the EU as well. We are working on that, and also if you talk about cybercrime, you cannot omit to mention the importance of Budapest Convention has had in creating those sort of impetus for creating on a national and regional and internationally. I think in our case in Finland we have more of a sort of the informal yet very structured way of communicating. But it's I think that picking up on what the previous speaker said, it is quite there is a clear common thread and commonalities to have this. It requires a lot of goal-oriented planning, as well as the sort of multi-layered approach, because we are dealing with a multi-layered problem or challenges, and you cannot just think of just one clear-cut, cookie cutter that sort of fixes the problem for once and for all. I think this is what we are sort of like. This is one of the new challenges that we see in dealing with this on national level, and I think that this is something that hopefully that will engender more of a cross-sectoral approach, not only within a specific IT or tech companies, but also overall the whole cross-sectoral approach, which is very much needed, national and regional, internationally. Yeah.
Okay, if I may, I just want to pick up on a couple of points that Risto made, which I think really exemplify the complexity in information sharing here. So one is a lot of the critical national infrastructure at the moment, and increasingly so, is being operated by the private sector. So therefore, there has to be collaboration between public and private sector. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. However, directors of companies, especially public companies, they've got fiduciary duties, and they've got directors' responsibilities, and responsibilities to their shareholders. And those are their primary responsibilities in their roles as directors of organisations, especially those that are publicly traded. And whilst there is a tremendous amount of goodwill in this sector to work together, Dan's referenced that there is, platforms such as CISP work incredibly well and do share information, the ISACs you referenced. I think really when things get difficult, from a director's perspective, you're going to start thinking about your responsibilities first, and that's where there may be some disincentives to actually collaborate when that's the time you need to. I think the point about that's the role of government to really minimise that risk to individuals and also organisations is incredibly important. I think as well that's incredibly important to try and alleviate some of the wider cultural issue in cybersecurity around ambulance tracing, which also does occur now, because of that kind of fear of sharing information and actually admitting where there are vulnerabilities and actually where organisations may have made mistakes and learnt lessons. By not sharing that information as openly as possible, how can innovators, the types of people we work with, produce better solutions to those problems and solve the right problems that are going to cause strategic benefit? They don't get access to those customer needs as well. So you end up in this cyclical issue, which gets worse and worse.
Yeah. And so is that something in your mind that the public sector should be better at doing, identifying what those core problems are and then communicating them such that industry can innovate, such that, VCs, we've got Slush coming this week, right? So that VCs can get involved and they can actually fund the right kind of technology that's solving the right problems rather than something that's solving a perceived problem.
Yeah, I think so. That's part of it. I think they've got to help industry as well in terms of opening up. We've referenced how government, especially in the UK, has opened up quite significantly in this space. And you've got the likes of the NTSC working very outwardly and in collaboration with industry to help advise and guide them, and also help them respond to incidents live. But I think that kind of needs to go further from a kind of policy, incentives and regulatory perspective, to try and help industry actually do the right thing at all times, not just the right thing in peace times, because that's how you learn, and that's where I think more needs to be done. I think in terms of problem sharing from an innovation perspective, yes, I think again UK government's doing that very well. There's some open source information on key areas of focus at the moment, and those types of problems are the ones that we share with startups and help connect them to it to try and innovate against those and solve them. But again, there's more that can be done there, and I actually think that's somewhere where industry needs to get better at as well.
Absolutely. So it's just waved at me, so I'll pass.
Being a VC myself, I would suggest that we would not put our hopes on the VCs to fix anything in this domain. It's on the companies themselves, and the VCs hopefully will allow the companies to cooperate for the benefit of the broader society. But if I may build on the good comments that we just heard, there's one challenge for large companies which face the first real cybersecurity crisis. It is that still today they have not practiced enough on how they proceed through that, because when the large crisis hits for the first time, it becomes a management team and a board topic. And they haven't practiced the process. They haven't thought in advance, what shall we disclose, when shall we disclose, how do we communicate to our customers. At the lower levels, they may have run a lot of exercises, but something that you don't practice, you don't have the capability if you don't practice it. So this is also something that it's improving and increasing, but we are nowhere near where we need to be, even in large companies.
Absolutely, and on that practicing point, that actually brings me to another talking point here around, do organisations establish the relationships that they need? I think you used the term there, Saj, in peacetime. Do organisations think about not just their own internal processes, but some of the external organisations that they should be engaging with? And, do you feel those that are here from government, do you feel that enough organisations are trying to get your time? And those here from organisations, do you feel if you approach government that you're given the time, the space, the capacity to actually have the conversation you want? And I hope this is the point that doesn't descend into an argument. But, is there enough capacity in the system for us to actually be having the conversations that we need to have? Dan's waved, so good. I'll go to you first.
Thanks, Michael. I just observed that the NCSC, we now have an engagements directorate, and I think that's largely focused on development of long-term relationships and trust relationships, in order that we're not solely in a set of circumstances where an organisation faces a crisis and NCSC is seeking to engage that company or that organisation in a crisis scenario and make friends and help them address that challenge. It's obviously far easier to do that in the crisis, and also that organisation will be better prepared if that engagement is done on the back of longer term engagement and advice and guidance and relationship development. That means that when that crisis happens, some of the work's already been done. The organisation is arguably better prepared. Maybe it's done some exercising, as Risto suggested. Yeah, and then the crisis is just a little bit easier to handle.
Okay, and then perhaps from the side of the table.
I think there are also problems in this area, so that I think that very often the private and public sector still don't see each other as partners in doing something together. Mm-hmm. I think there are problems in attitudes on both sides, and that's sometimes a blocking point in doing something that's beneficial for both sides.
Okay, and I know you've recently spent some time over in the US with Nist.
Yes.
There we go. I knew the abbreviation would come to me. How did you find that collaboration?
No, yeah, it was really useful how it works. That the Nist, they're doing the standardization, but they are also listening to companies, of course the government, and there's a lot of discussion going at the forums and in the group, and it's really taking care of all the opinions. It's really useful. But one thing I noticed in America, that some places they know that they don't have enough cybersecurity, but they think that okay, this would be too expensive to fix it. So for example, after Heartbleed, after some ransomware problems, some hospital decide, okay, if this happened to us, we have to be ready. So they bought bitcoins beforehand. Mm-hmm. So that was the solution.
That's it. I've actually seen a few organizations do that, and one of the questions I get from them is, do we need a Bitcoin wallet? Do we need something in advance? And part of your practicing for a situation, Risto, is do we need something ready? Do we need to be able to pay? Obviously, that's always a difficult question to answer, because we know that you shouldn't pay criminals at all, because it's not going to end well. But at least the conversation's being had. So one of the other topics that I always think is interesting, and in a forum like this, is the part that the media has to play, and this reluctance to either work or share information between companies and with the public sector could come down to what's known as the Daily Mail story, or basically you don't want your organisation, Colonial have faced it, Equifax have faced it, being on the front page of the news, because in some ways that may actually do more damage to the organisation than the attack itself. Risto, you work with a number of companies across all kinds of different sectors. Is that a conversation that people have with you? Do they talk about this fear of being in the public domain if something happens?
Sure, and the big problem is that cybersecurity incidents are very complicated, and the journalists that cover them don't really understand them very deeply, mm-hmm. and therefore it's very easy to be misinterpreted and misjudged on what the company has done, what they knew when they made those decisions, and so forth. So the risk is high, and this is also related to the earlier discussion on disclosure. Mm-hmm. I mean, F-Secure does a lot of incident response work across Europe and the US, especially in the financial sector, and the difficulties in disclosing, especially let's say in financial sector, when customer accounts and funds have been jeopardized, is still very, very high. The bar is extremely high, even if they have some regulatory requirements for that. I remember when in the 90s, when we served 8 out of the 10 largest banks in the world, none of them publicly admitted that they had a virus incident. Mm-hmm. They all claimed that they have never had a single virus incident, and we knew that every single one of them had a virus incident. Now it's all over 20 years ago, so I can publicly sort of talk about this, but they lied officially. So we still have this stigma related to incidents, and what Maersk did, for example, I think it was exemplary. Because of course they had to announce what was happening because they didn't know where the containers were anymore, and they lost all their customers' goods, so they couldn't hide it. But they went so far beyond just not hiding it, they gave all the details so that everybody and the community would benefit. So I think we need more examples like those, people who lead from the front end.
Yeah, and perhaps, posing a question, if more people were to be honest and open about these kinds of compromises and be more willing to share that information, maybe the stigma associated with them would over time reduce, because
Exactly.
they're part of the normal background noise, and we know they are. We know that they're happening all the time, but you tend to see these little peak events in the news that unfortunately gather too much attention. Adrian, just going to come to you for a UK perspective as BA there on, that potential fear of being in the public eye for something the organisation has and hasn't done, and how that's maybe slightly different in UK as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think how you manage a cyber incident is the difference between it being something you can manage and get through and being a full-blown crisis, and the same is true, of course, in the comms side of things. If you manage the comms well, it doesn't have to be such a crisis that threatens other things in your business. Doing it badly leads to the CEO resigning. We've seen that in multiple cases. Mm-hmm. So it comes down to, I think, confidence in leadership and being prepared for this, and like in the example of Maersk, not trying to hide it, not trying to downplay it, talk through openly what happened and how you're managing it and how you're getting through it, and the story will go away. People will move on from it. But the worst thing to do is to come out, downplay it, say it's not a problem, we're on top of it, and then something further happens, some further information comes out, and it looks like you've lost control, and that's where an organisation has a full-blown crisis, basically.
Yeah. So one of the fine lines I know we tread, and I talk to people in the US a lot about this, is the demarcation between compulsion and voluntary disclosure. So it's how much pressure does the public sector put on the private sector to disclose these kinds of incidents? And to your point again, Risto, they're so incredibly complicated. If we write something down, is it going to be fit for purpose? Is it going to be right? So maybe Dan, I'll come back to you first instance, just on where that line is in terms of how much do we compel. And I know that the UK has some law at the moment that we're investigating in terms of Internet of Things, etc. But it's like, where do we stop? Because I'm sure, having worked for large organisations in the past, sometimes being compelled is the best solution for us, because it means we just have to do it, and the legal team doesn't get in the way.
Thanks, Michael. That's a question nobody wants to answer.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so that there are obviously elements of mandatory reporting already out there in the Nist regulations, the Nist directive, as it's called in the EU. And I think the challenging question, I think, is about how that works in practice, the competition, I think, between a requirements-based system and a trust-based system. If you move towards a requirements-based system, harder to maintain, arguably, in some people's view, a trust-based system, and hard for organisations that work across international boundaries if they would be in one jurisdiction under an obligation to report, in another system not, and focusing on sharing within trust-based communities. I think that the more alignment there is globally, or at least between allies, the greater chance there'll be of those arrangements working out. And also governments thinking, as I sort of alluded to in those opening remarks, governments thinking quite carefully about the circumstances and environments in which mandatory reporting and requirements work and are valuable, and the environments or circumstances in which they're not. Have I squeezed off the hook on that one?
No, it's a good. It's the answer. It's sort of the answer I was expecting. So,
Yeah.
I mean, the US has a very complicated model because not only is there particular sector legislation, there may be state legislation, there may be federal legislation. So, sort of to pick up on one point you had there about people working in different jurisdictions. I talk to organisations that they'll read one piece of legislation and they're told not to make something public, and they'll read another piece of legislation and it'll say you absolutely have to, and then it's a matter of the general counsel or someone in the organisation working out which set of rules they're going to follow. So on that topic of even robust national conversation and then international standards, how far away do people think we are from actually trying to de-muddy that that problem space for organizations such that they can rehearse what they're going to do in a specific situation and they can be ready to share, to engage with the public sector? Anyone wanting to pick up on that?
I think
Saj, thank you.
I think we're quite far away from it actually. So the point was made by the ambassador at the beginning that this is a borderless topic. It's also a sectorless topic, but then rolling out sector-specific legislation to mandate a requirement is not that useful across a sectorless topic, and so I think that kind of almost that change from that verticalisation of legislation towards that more of a horizontal look across at a national level and international level needs to be taken. So I'll give you an example. Recently, I've seen in the US, there's new legislation coming pertaining to US banks relating to the mandatory disclosure of computer incidents. And that's interesting, especially given what Risto said about 20 years ago, none of them would admit that they were subject to any kind of incident. So it shows that clearly, even on a sectoral basis in the US, that something it's been envisaged that more needs to be done. But I think that, to my point, is that's only so good in that particular sector, and it's only so good of how you define an incident as well. So it's an incredibly complex topic, I think. But more definitely needs to be done towards it. I think mandatory notifications and disclosure, in my view, is the way, because otherwise I think as a commercial operator you're always going to put your commercial interests and your reputational interests first. I think there's another point covered. I was going to talk about the colonial incident, which is an interesting inversion actually of the national security risk, but I'll come back to that in a sec.
Okay. Does anyone else want to jump in?
There's a mandatory reporting if it's not covered by some governmental regulation. There are also some industry-specific regulations, like in the payment card industry, which is not so, in this sense, maybe not regulated, but the Visa, MasterCard, PCI Council, they require the card manufacturers or the payment card processors to inform, to report the security problems to the regulators. So that's also covering some points.
Absolutely. I've been weighing that over here as well.
Thank you. Just briefly comment on the issue of regulation or trust-based. I think it's a really delicate balancing act to do. I think no straightforward answer there. I think truth is somewhere in the middle. If you think about sort of trust-based, the confidence-based, the quality of information, the level of detailed information might be quite different from what you are set out in the law as an obligation, disclosure obligation. But on the other hand, if you are totally rely on the trust-based or voluntary basis, then you also have a sort of challenges there with the content of or the level or the interaction of or interchange of information. So I think there, in order to hit the balance, I mean, regulation, whenever governments impose some regulation, it doesn't go as imposing straightly you do this or that. It's based on a very broad-based consultation, at least in our case in Finland. So for instance, when we had the newly regulation on 5G network security, there is a prime example of how we go about not only preparing the law content, but also in view of the implementation requirements. And of course, at the end of the day, we are very cognizant of the competitiveness, the competition angle of different regulations, and we do not want to stifle our businesses. We do not want to curtail the potential investment. And this is the very delicate balancing act. And I think that something in the middle is that what we need to do, and we are doing in Finland.
Okay, fantastic.
I think a good summary of this whole discussion from the corporate point of view is that the corporations hate mandatory requirements from the government. There's already so much of that. But there's one thing that they detest even more, and that is unclarity. Because that's so expensive. So we don't really know what to do and what we should do and what the liabilities are. So the right type of regulation that would be horizontal and would bring clarity would be quite welcome. But then in the worst case we do sort of both horizontal and sectoral regulation, and then in the crossing points it gets really murky. And then there's even more unclarity. So I think clarity above everything else should be the guideline for the regulators.
Absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate that. And I think, that sort of brings us nicely to the complexity of supply chain. So we were talking about, doing things sectorally doesn't survive contact with the way that the world functions now. And I think somebody was joking to me about the fact that, the fuel crisis in the US recently because of colonial meant that shipping agencies had their cars backed up on the New Jersey Turnpike, and nobody that was a haulier ever thought that something going on the other side of the world or the other side of the country or a complex supply chain would impact their vertical. So how aware do you think people are of this world that we're in now in terms of the complexity of the supply chain? And are people, when they're looking at their own risk and they're assessing cybersecurity vulnerability, are they looking at first order? Are they looking at the things that they know and understand, or are they beginning to? Are we seeing a shift in the fact that people understand? I need to go into a lot of depth here and potentially look into other jurisdictions, other countries to really understand where I'm vulnerable.
Just on the colonial example, I think it's a really interesting encapsulation of the risk, essentially, of outsourcing national security risk. So obviously the pipeline was shut down, but that was a business decision because of the business impact, the operational impact, and the cost of keeping it open. But the fallout of the pipeline being shut down was dealt with by the government. But there was apparently limited discussion between the operators of the colonial pipeline and government in making that decision to shut down the pipeline. That's a great example of critical national infrastructure being operated and being in the hands and at the whim of decisions by the private sector, which can actually have societal impact and cause a bit of societal disruption, which is a national security risk. So, in terms of your question about supply chains, it's we're seeing a lot of innovation in that space because it is incredibly complicated. Trying to map an organisation's supply chain and even limit how far back you go. Are you talking third, fourth, fifth, sixth party? And increasingly businesses are operating in their own business ecosystems as well, where a supplier is not necessarily just a supplier but a partner, could also be a customer. It's very, very difficult. So I think that's complex. It's hard for big organisations, but for smaller organisations who might actually find themselves in the supply chain of something which is critical, they may not know that in terms of their own provision, and perhaps their cybersecurity is not necessarily right-sized to recognise that risk that potentially they present in the broader across the broader spectrum of things.
Yeah. So if I were to sort of summarise that, what we're saying is the size of the company doesn't always reflect the size of the risk that company is carrying.
Yeah.
And of course, the larger companies, if we look in the US at Bank of America, those kinds of companies, they have the size, the capacity, the resource to do cybersecurity well, but smaller companies don't. So is that somewhere you think the public sector needs to step in because of the risk to the supply chain? Or or is there another approach? Is it private sector sharing? I'm getting a shaking of the head from Risto, so I'm going to come to you first, because you clearly have a strong opinion on this one, so that's good.
Well, there's plenty of high-quality cybersecurity services companies that can help private companies to manage their security infrastructure. And it is true, exactly as you said, it's very difficult for even a large industrial player to recruit and retain a high-quality cybersecurity team. Because the best people want to work with the best people, and typically you don't find them in this environment. So there's a services industry that has been growing because of this. And I don't think the government should sort of come into that arena to compete with the private sector.
Okay.
I agree. I don't think they can actually. Like, if I'm honest, I think the government are good at doing certain things. So, for example, they typically hold information at a national level across networks, which is, not necessarily going to be information that's in the public domain. That provides something which is interesting context. What private sector operators and people providing services in this space probably have a bit more context on is what's actually happening on victims' networks and inside private networks. And therefore, it's the combination of those two sides of the same coin, in effect, which creates a really good proposition for public-private partnership in this space. But that partnership needs to be specific, and it also can't rely on, if I'm honest, like goodwill, because at the end of the day, a private sector organisation is only going to dedicate so many resources to something if they're not paid for it, if there needs to be a kind of much more specific level of work in collaboration with government, that needs to have the right commercial framework around it as well, to ensure incentives are balanced.
I'm getting a nod there from Adrian as well, which is great, and I'll just go to the end of the table.
Yeah, one solution could be that the government will grant some research money to solve some specific problems together with small companies and maybe small company like F-Secure and VTT, and then small companies, and then the government give us research money because we have some same research problem that we want to solve together, and it's more effective so that all the companies can get the solution at the same time. Government support this with money, and then maybe companies use also some of their own money, but the solution can be found together more effectively this way.
All right, I'm being given a 3-minute warning over there as well. So what I'll do is I'll just come. I know we've talked about a number of different topics across public-private partnerships, and from information sharing to why organisations don't, to some of the pitfalls of mandating things with legislation, but then some of the benefits of that as well. So what I sort of want to what I want to sort of come back to towards the end is, firstly, do you think we all speak the same language? Are we in a world now where we can actually communicate? Clearly, we've had some very open conversations today about cybersecurity. Is there still work to be done in terms of actually communicating those challenges, and for governments to better understand the business challenges, what's going to ultimately go into making a decision? So I'll get you to think about that for a second as well. And then the other is, how is this different, and this might be for you, Saj, how is this different for cloud native and digital native companies? So a lot of the time we look at our historical critical national infrastructure, we look at the big companies that have existed for many years. Is the problem space different for companies that have grown up in the digital age, the Googles, the Amazons, and are they in some way carrying more or less risk? So there's sort of a couple of questions there, hopefully, that we can draw the session to a close on. Either are open for discussion. So, Dan, you've not spoken in a while, or Adrian, actually. Adrian, you've not spoken in a while. I'll go to you.
One of the things we mentioned is government has a massive procurement power in itself, does a lot of buying of the same products and services that enterprises use to defend their networks. Mm-hmm. So government's in a way in a privileged position to set the best standards through its own procurement, and that will then just naturally feed out into the wider ecosystem. So I think rather than kind of getting back to we're going to regulate or we're going to look at how industry is protecting itself, it just needs to lead by example at all levels. Mm-hmm. So what are the best products to buy? How do you contract? How do you do outsourcing? And also back to the point earlier about how do you manage that comms around a crisis? So be open and talk about the incidents that government is having and use that as an example for the wider sectors.
Okay. Dan?
Just on your question of are we talking the same language, I think we increasingly are. I've been in this environment for about 10 years. I would say 10 years ago, if we were having this sort of conversation, we would spend a lot of time not arguing, but just sort of trying to understand what we mean by, if you say incident response, do we understand that to mean the same things? What do we mean by certification or mandatory reporting? It's really interesting that we've had this conversation with a really high level of understanding of what we mean when we use those terms and what we're talking about. So yeah, we're in a much better place.
Okay. Risto?
Yeah, I think we have made a lot of progress, but at the same time, technology has progressed as well. And especially our politicians are typically not technology experts, yet they play a big role in legislation. And let's take Visa's example of homomorphic encryption. How many civil servants or politicians actually know what homomorphic encryption is?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not the most important new technology, but it is potentially relevant
Mm-hmm.
to new legislation that is being prepared. So I really think that not just in cybersecurity, but for the improvement of everyday life, we need to deliberately and systematically re-educate the people who participate in the legislative process to understand technology better.
Okay. I agree. Anybody else want to leave a remark before we wrap up? No?
Well,
Okay. Yeah?
I quite agree with Risto and the others that there's still work to be done to be speaking the same language and learn from each other to understand. For instance, I think how I see government is an enabler of things. They enable things to be done, provide some kind of a basis where others can develop.
Okay. All right. Well, that leaves me, I think, to I'm getting the final wrap-up warning from over in the audience. So that leaves me to thank the panel. Thank you ever so much for the open and honest conversations, and thank you for not dodging some of the more difficult questions. I think they're definitely things that we need to talk about, and we need to be more comfortable sharing with each other such that we can make progress. So, and thank you to the people on the live stream. It's always intimidating having various cameras pointed at you. So thank you for joining us, and hopefully we'll continue this conversation another time.